all makes sense. If you run into any issues as you're watching this, once again, submit a question or a comment, and I'll try to help fix it however best I can. And with that, I want to turn the time over to our presenters. We have two excellent Pluralsight authors with us today. We have Kevin Miller and Tommy Van Schaik, and they're going to be talking about how to move away from wagile. So I think Kevin's going to get things started, and I'll turn the time over to him.
Thank you, Daniel. So my name is Kevin Miller. I hail from Philadelphia in the United States of America. I'm a senior IT management consultant for my company, Delta Technology, and author of 3 Pluralsight courses, soon to be 4 courses in a few weeks. With me is my partner in crime, Tommy Van Schaik, from the Netherlands. Tommy is a senior IT project manager for NATO and author of 40, you heard me right, I said 40 Pluralsight courses. Tommy, I'm honored to co-host this webinar with you today.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm also excited. So our social media contact information is on the screen right now. So anyone that would love to connect, feel free to do so. This webinar is targeted for those who are using Waterfall and are considering moving to an agile methodology, or those who are struggling in an agile transition right now, and those who just want to learn more about IT and the IT organization. Our goal is to enable for some and to speed up for others, and to realize that agile hybrid is not a methodology, but instead it's just an illusion that entices people with the promise of the best of both worlds. But you should expect that it's the worst of both worlds for your team. So we broke this webinar up basically into 2 parts. First of all, Kevin will start off with explaining what wagile is, and he will review the 4 phases of an agile transition. And then he will wrap up the first half with a Q&A session in which you will have the opportunity to answer, your questions. Then we move on to the second part, where I will explain some wagile patterns that we identified and how to break free from them. We will close this webinar off with another recap and an opportunity for questions. So if you have any questions, please submit as you think of them, and we will jump right into them after each of the sessions. We did script out this webinar, so anything that it might feel a bit scripted, and we will chime into each other's part once in a while, but don't be alarmed if it sounds a bit scripted. All right, over to you, Kevin.
I think you're on mute, Kevin.
Kevin seems to be on mute. Kevin? There we are. There we are.
All right, let's start over. So waterfall is our base measurement. It's been around for over half a century. While most people look down on waterfall, it's the preferred methodology in certain situations. Waterfall is good for small projects since they are less likely to change. It's good for repeatable projects since there is a known end goal. It's also good for physical projects since the architecture is already defined. So think about building a house or a car. Things need to be done in order. Finally, there is little confusion around waterfall because it is a well-known process. The software development lifecycle consists of gathering requirements, designing a solution, building a solution, testing it, releasing it, and maintaining it. And that's all based on the waterfall methodology.
So, Kevin, question from my side. Since this is an IT-heavy audience, this being Pluralsight and all, could you give, I think Agile is the way to go in the IT industry. Could you give an example of where waterfall would be applicable in the IT world?
Sure. Yeah. So I used to work for a food services company quite a while ago, and we had to build and release software updates which contain menus twice a year. Now, the work was about 4 months long, and other than a few places where the data was changing, it was almost always the same work. And so waterfall allowed us to plan everything perfectly, but that's only because we were following a small proven process with little risk of changing.
Yeah, okay, so I think I know another example. When we moved on to build the jet fighter project, because it was such a large project, but also because it had such physical components to it, there was also a lot of digital stuff, but because the physical components thrived the way, we also had to use waterfall there. So yeah, I completely agree. It depends on the type of product. It's definitely useful when selecting your methodology, let's say.
Okay. Great, thanks. So Waterfall has its challenges with medium to large size projects where the scope is bound to change during implementation. It's also not ideal for innovative work where the end goal is unknown at the start of the project. And it's bad for digital projects where the underlying architecture is always changing. Unlike with physical items, building different components of software can happen simultaneously, which leads to everything changing all the time. Waterfall has a terrible reputation. It's been proven to fail more often than succeed, because often it's used for projects that I described in that entire cons list on the right. And there's a tendency to push all requested changes into a phase 2. Now, the business, having been burned in the past by never actually receiving their promised phase 2, they tend to push for everything in the kitchen sink to be included in the phase 1. Thereby making the project scope grow out of control. So about 2 decades ago, Agile was born. And with it being the hope of it being a better methodology, and in most cases it is. Agile is good for all of the projects Waterfall is bad for. It's good for medium to large projects where the scope is bound to change, innovative work where the end goal is unknown at the beginning of the project, and it's good for digital projects where the underlying architecture is in flux during development.
This I definitely agree with. So this is the force multiplier that Agile was born for. Especially software-driven project it came out of the software world. Once you apply Agile, you will see over time that it is a force multiplier. So definitely in the digital world, this is the way to go, the intended purpose.
Yeah. So Agile also struggles with a poor reputation, since it is great for innovative work that often means that there is no predetermined ending, which means the projects can linger. It's more rigid than Waterfall. In Waterfall, the business partner can request changes at any time they want. And in Agile, changes should only really be added in between sprints, not during sprints. Now, I know that's not what always happens, but that's the way it's supposed to happen. Agile also requires more interaction with the business, as they will be asked to provide a representative to join the development team. You may know this person as the product owner. And of course, these should be viewed as positives. And of course, Agile is seen to have a higher overhead than Waterfall, as weekly meetings turn into daily meetings, and there's often a half to full day planning session. Now, as I mentioned, these should be viewed as positives. The rigidity keeps people focused. And while business representatives may not want more communication, they may view that as more intrusive on their time. More communication leads to less assumptions and less misunderstandings between them and the development teams, yielding a better product. So problems with Agile's reputation and overhead come from the teams being in a wagile state. Naturally, people think they can combine the two methodologies to create an even better hybrid methodology, and that's known as wagile. People inexperienced in Agile think wagile offers them the best of both worlds. Logically, this makes sense since Waterfall is good for small projects and Agile is good for medium to large size projects. It also makes sense that the hybrid approach would keep everyone happy. Not forcing change on people reduces resistance and disruption. And of course, every organization thinks they are special, and a hybrid approach will meet their special needs.
Yeah, Kevin, this is what we talked about this morning. People and their interactions are special, but very few organizations are special and their organizational design.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Tommy. Wagile offers actually the worst of both worlds. It is intrusive on the business and allows for a lot of scope creep, causing projects to never end. It also results in duplicate meetings. Wagile is confusing. Agile has rules. When those rules are ignored, it demotivates the early adopters and the true believers. Wagile leads to a poor reputation, but not for itself. People say Agile's not working. But truthfully, when you are in a wagile state, you're not being agile. Agile will work just fine once you get there. Finally, wagile causes even higher overhead. I call this overhead plus plus. You've heard of C++. Well, this wagile causes overhead plus plus. With wagile, weekly meetings are supposed to be dropped with the addition of agile planning sessions, daily stand-ups, and retrospectives. But often management wants to keep the weekly meetings on top of the agile meetings so that they can stay informed the way they always have. So you see, there are no pros to wagile. This graph is a seductive illusion. It does not exist in the real world. So our conclusion is exactly what the title on screen says. Wagile is the worst. Now let's take a look at a timeline of visual events starting with phase 1. Inexperienced IT leaders and business contributors assume the change to Agile is as simple as turning on a light switch. So here they are using a waterfall methodology. They realize waterfall has issues and want to transition to Agile. Maybe they read a book, watched a webinar, maybe they sent someone to training. And the time finally comes to make the change, as you can see represented here. And this is what inexperienced people think will happen. They assume everyone will be working in this new methodology and things will be better from here on out. But anyone who has been through an Agile transformation before knows that this is a fantasy.
Exactly. I know a good example. Once we did a project for a real estate company, exactly this graph is what management expected. Me being my first project as an Agile coach, we definitely had to do some expectation management because we both know that this is not reality.
Yep. As soon as change is implemented, people enter phase 2. They quickly realize change is a process and it will take some time to transition from waterfall to Agile. However, this is how they think it is going to happen. Tommy and I like to call this incline the path of hope. Inexperienced individuals will assume everything will slowly improve over time and everyone will eventually be Agile. People enter phase 3 just as fast as they enter phase 2. When an Agile transition starts, things almost immediately get worse. If you're experiencing this right now, we have some good news and some bad news for you. The good news is this is not unusual. You are not alone. Every person at every organization goes through this. Some people will resist the change. Other people will be on board, but simply not have enough experience to do things the right way. As a result, performance drops. As people are trying to figure it out, deadlines and stress are creeping up on them. And what does anyone do in a time of stress? They go back to what they know to get the job done. In this case, waterfall. And welcome to Wagile. As you already know by now, Wagile is not a methodology, but an awkward transition between waterfall and Agile.
Yeah, Kevin, I love that. The way that you say that this happens to every organization. It's interesting to see that between us and between our coaching experience, this has happened in almost every organization without exception. So the question only remains, how long do they remain in this state and what is the next step to be taken? So back to you.
Yeah, thanks. So Wagile cannot be avoided, and in teams they can be in phase 3 for a very long time. Every Agile transformation that has taken place has had a Wagile state, as you mentioned, and every Agile transformation that will take place in the future will have a Wagile state. And how do we know this? Because transformations involve people from both IT and the business. It is extremely rare to find an individual that can navigate a challenging transition without any setbacks. Now imagine finding a team of those individuals working together at the same organization. You see our point? Wagile exists because it takes just one person on the team to struggle for the entire team to struggle. Phase 3 is the most critical, where one of 3 things will happen. The first scenario is where leadership abandons the Agile transformation and returns to the waterfall methodology. Now, this is acceptable in some situations and better than remaining in a Wagile state. The second scenario is where leadership realizes they are in a Wagile state and makes the effort to completely let go of the waterfall and Agile hybrid, thus allowing them to move to an Agile methodology. The third scenario is where leadership holds on to the incorrect idea that a hybrid and waterfall Agile methodology is the best path forward, thereby remaining in a low performance environment indefinitely until one of the other 2 outcomes occurs or the company goes out of business. If leadership opts for choice number 2, letting go of Wagile so they can move to Agile, they enter phase 4. Phase 4 is when they finally realize adopting Agile will be a bumpy road with many successes and failures. Teams may experience a few good sprints, and then all of a sudden, the business representative introduces scope creep and doesn't want to wait for the next sprint. Or someone from another area of IT transfers onto your team, and you struggle getting that person to let go of waterfall and wagile and fully embrace agile, or 1,000 other scenarios. Eventually, though, the team will stop using waterfall and be agile. This journey is a long one, but well worth it if your project meets the criteria we reviewed earlier. Tommy?
Yeah, trying to find the mute button. Sorry about that. All right, so we have a couple of questions. The first one we got from Lawrence. Thank you, Lawrence. So, does Agile tend to be adopted by management fiat rather than from within teams? That's actually a good question. Mind if I take this one, Kevin?
Yeah, go for it, Tommy.
So it depends, as with most things. First of all, if you have management backup while implementing Agile, that definitely helps. There are a lot of organizations that struggle on where to begin. And basically, you can start from a greenfield scenario where where the different individual teams start their Agile journeys. And once that becomes successful, expands. And then we see it like dripping out into the rest of the organization. However, if you have what they refer to as a management coalition, so management buys into Agile and is willing to sponsor it and share your successes, that will definitely help in the way you implement Agile. As a matter of fact, we do have a couple of tips in the other side of this presentation that actually go into this in more detail. But I think if does it need to start with management? I don't necessarily think so, but having management on board definitely helps. So I hope that that answers your question. All right. You want to take the next one, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it again. Go ahead and read it to me.
Okay. So the next one is from Janie. How do you suggest coaching your team away from the Wagile stage?
Okay, so yeah, great question. And that's actually the entire second half of our webinar. I mean, I can tell you that it's not an easy journey. It is not something that you want to take on too much at one time. If you try to coach everyone at the same time in the beginning, you're going to have a lot of resistance to deal with, and you're going to be spread too thin. And so really the best information I can give you as part of this Q&A session before we really dive into the details is to take it small. You want to start with a couple of people. You want to start by proving things on a small scale and kind of grow it out from there. If you try to convert your entire team of say 20 people plus 5 or 6 in management plus 10 in the business, you're going to be spread too thin. And honestly, what's going to happen is the resistance is going to build among those people. So what you want to do is you want to get a couple of quick wins. You want to get a couple of people on board. And so now you're not alone. You're not fighting the battle alone. You have a teammate. And once you have a teammate, you can cover twice, 3 times, 4 times the amount of ground that you could by yourself. And so that's the biggest tip I can give you. But stay tuned. We're gonna cover a lot of that in the second half.
All right. So the next question comes from Stephen. What is a digital project? That's actually a good elaborating question. So when you have different types of products that you're working on, let's say you have a physical product, let's say a car or something that you're building on. Inherently, building things like a car or a house, for that matter, it requires you to do a lot of design up front. So you'll need to have a design. You'll need to you need to have some agreement up front on what you're going to do, because it's very costly to change your design as you're doing the project. For a digital project, that's a bit different. With software and most digital products, it's easier to change the entire architecture while you're midway in development. Now, of course, there's also a cost associated with that. But obviously, when you change your software design, that is a lot less impactful than it is when building a house. So with digital projects, we refer to projects like software or more like digital oriented, if that answers your question. You want me to read the next one, Kevin?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Is there any way you can avoid Wagile? Any groundwork can be done and then implement?
Short answer is no. No, you can't avoid Wagile. It's something that, you're going to read things online, and you might even pick it up in a book. You might even hear it in a webinar. The truth is you can't avoid Wagile, because Wagile is going to happen the minute stress picks up, right? And we'd be foolish to say that you know, well, in our transition, we're going to take it slow and we're not going to have a time of stress. We're going to give people time to think and do this. And that's great. But the truth is, in every organization, you're going to have a deadline. You're going to have some kind of stress. You're going to have to deliver something. And at that point, you know, like I said earlier, people slip back to what they know. And it's all because they want to do the right thing. They want to do their job. And so they're going to fall back to waterfall, and you're going to go through these growing pains. And that's exactly what they are, is growing pains. But after you pull that person back out of waterfall and you get them operating in an agile way, no matter how hard no matter how much they don't want to do it and how much they fight you, when you pull them back and get them working in an agile way, you get another one of those peaks. You get another one of those bumps. The next time around, you're probably going to experience it again, maybe with the same person, maybe with someone different. But you'll have that experience of picking yourself back up, right? So stress comes, you get knocked down, you pick yourself back up by sticking to agile. That's how you do it. That's how you get out of the wagile state. It's not fast, and it definitely can't be avoided because, as I said, it's not as if anyone doesn't have a fall down scenario in business, right? You're going to have that stress. You're going to get knocked down, and you got to pick yourself up. And when you do that time and time and time again, it becomes a lot easier every single time you do it. It's that first one and that second one and that third one. Those are the hardest. But once you do that, once you pick yourself up off the mat, everything becomes easier, and you can help others pick themselves off the mat.
I agree. So the next one is from a brother in arms, Casey. Thanks for the question. Hey guys, what advice do you have for teams that are doing a good job implementing agile practices themselves, but are required to continue working with others in the organization or outside partners who have not done so? This is actually a question we also go into in the next part of the presentation. But yeah, definitely, if you run agile practices and you have an agile mindset and your team is continually working on improving themselves while others are more stuck in this waterfall way of doing things, there are a couple of things you can do. Basically, you could informally go to these people. We discussed this in length in the other part of the presentation. You could informally make agreements that help both parties. But there are things, like you said, acquisition is one of those departments that usually goes with very long and stretch out processes that will be hard to deal with in an agile fashion. There are larger frameworks that are being created right now that are also looking at business agility. So that's the entire organization going into this more iterative agile approach. But basically, the short answer, Casey, is that you'll have to tailor your communication and way of working with each individual that is not following your practice. That's basically the only way you can do that. Might not be as satisfying, but I think that's the only way. Okay, so the next one is from Steven. Our organization is going through a time of stress, as you said, and has firmly fallen into a wagile in response. When we finish this time of stress, how should I recommend we make progress? You want to take that one, Kevin?
Yeah, so you read that to me one more time, Tommy, please.
Yeah. So the organization is going through a time of stress and has fallen back into a wagile response. And the question is, when we finish this and we get out of this stressful situation, how would we make progress again? How would we go back to being as agile as possible?
So the best thing to do is during the time of stress, you want to get the job done, right? And people are going to fall back to their waterfall tendencies. They're going to say, you know what, I know we're in the middle of a sprint, but I need you to get this feature in. I need you to do it today. I don't want you to end the sprint. I just want you to put it in this sprint right now. I don't want to have a meeting about it. Just get it done. Those are the types of stress things you're going to hear. And you can't do it. You can't do it. That is a Scrum Master's job. A Scrum Master is to hold the line and to say, hey, we have our processes here. We have to get things done. Now, obviously, a production outage, a critical thing where you're losing money, obviously you're going to have your exceptions there. But where something really isn't critical, and the Scrum Master has to be aware of this. They have to have a knowledge to be able to make this judgment. But when you have something that really isn't that critical, but people are saying is critical, even if it's your boss, you have to hold the line. That's your job. And so once you stick to agile and you pull out of things, that's as I mentioned earlier, pulling yourself off the mat, and it becomes a lot easier. Now, immediately after you do that, you have to go to that person and explain, here's why I did it. Here's the result of how it happened. and here's how we're going to handle this again in the future, right? And make it a dialogue, right? It's not a you know, you being a commander. It's having a dialogue with your business representative or your boss or your team. But you have to have that follow-up. You don't just want to, you know, be that person who says, I'm going to stick to this because this is the way it is. This is how it's written in the book. This is what I heard from Kevin and Tommy on the webinar. And, you know, there are no exceptions. There are always exceptions. But you really have to be picky and choosy about what those exceptions are. And as I said, once you pull yourself out of that, have that follow-up, have that dialogue, and explain this is all part of the process, right? It's also good if you mention up front that your transition to wagile will have these moments, right? Don't pretend like they're not going to happen. Don't think that they don't exist. They do, and they are going to happen, and you're going to experience them. And if you write it down, especially if you write it down, when these things happen, you can go to that person and say, okay, in our project charter, in our on our online message board on SharePoint, on our Teams situation, here's how we said we were going to handle this. Let's do that. This is what we planned. Let's follow the plan. All right, Tommy, I think we're at time where we can probably jump into the second half. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we can jump into the second half, and we can save the questions for the second Q&A part. There are a lot of them, so thanks, guys, for the interest. And we will go back to those once we do the second part of this presentation. All right. All
right, so moving on to the second half of the webinar, Tommy will review the 3 wagile anti-patterns and provide 3 fixes for each. As Tommy mentioned, please remember to keep submitting your questions. We'll have one more round of Q&A at the end. Take it away, Tommy.
I'm muting myself. Okay. First of all, we have let's say a blog ready on the Pluralsight website. You can see the link down below where we go into detail about the next part of the presentation. So if you want to read up on that, on what we just discussed, feel free to go ahead and view that. So starting off by the anti-patterns that we see and how you can identify whether or not you are in a wagile state. And the first one, and this kind of relates back to the question we received from Casey as well. What happens if you seem to be the only agile team? So let's say you're a team, you adopted agile processes, you have a nice iterative approach going, maybe you're using Scrum, but around you, you have companies or parts of the organization that are just not agile. They use a waterfall method just because that it's ingrained in them. A good one is always finance, or the rest of the project management organization might also be moving in a waterfall way. So the question is, if you find yourself being alone in this, like screaming in a desert, what is it that you can actually do? And we actually have 3 things that tend to help. The first one, and it's the most basic one, is to just show people that it's working. You have a good process going. People tend to love working in an agile manner, so your team is happy, and you just are booking successes all around the organization. So showing people that it works will kind of force them to look at this way of working and adopt it if it's feasible for them. So definitely looking at the way that showing people that it's working is one of the ways you can go ahead. The second one we see is we expand informally. So let's say you're doing well, but the rest of the organization is not agile. Just informally expand. Like we just said, make agreements with individual partners around you and make them help you with the agile way of working. Make agreements on how you would interact with them. And perhaps they will adopt the method as well as they see it's beneficial for them. This also goes for the non-IT departments. And the last one is to build a team. Basically, if you are doing well, you're doing agile, just take on more work, expand your team, move to a scrum of scrums or another methodology to move into multiple teams if needed. Just build from the ground up. So gradually expanding your team, building your team is also one of the ways you can build the agile way of working within your organization without necessarily formally having agreement that the rest of the organization should do so. So those are the 3 ways.
Thank you, Tommy. I have an example here. Not too long ago, I worked for a Fortune 10 company, and we were the only team that was really using agile, meaning IT. The business was still in a waterfall mindset. And so we had our daily meetings, but we didn't have proper business representation. We had our product owner, but that product owner, as I mentioned, is a large company. That product owner got their direction from someone else in the business. And that person in the business was not engaged. They were not engaged. They wanted to drop their requirements for 6 months and walk away. So what we did, this is an industry where As I mentioned before, that the time was set. You had specific deadlines that were laws. And so you had to deliver on a certain time, and you had so much time to do the work. And so what the best path forward was to actually move back to waterfall. Agile is wonderful. A lot of people in IT are going to push for it, especially the people working in it and where it's working well, but it is not the solution for everything. And in this particular case, as shocked as even I was to experience it, I actually recommended moving back to waterfall, and that ended up working out okay.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks. That's a good example. All right. So switching on to the second indicator that you are in a agile state is that you feel that your process is stuck. So you have what it shows mostly is usually in the daily stand-up that you have. So you have a stand-up, and it seems like it's just repeating itself over and over again. It is getting more lengthy, and people are not paying attention. And it seems like the actions that you put out in this daily stand-up, even the improvement ones that you do or during retrospectives, are just not followed up upon. If you feel the process is stuck, it's not expanding, you're not getting better over time doing this continuous improvement thing, that is also one of those patterns that we see that you're in a agile state. So 3 things you can do there. And the first one, we also kind of talked about in the Q&A. How much agile do you actually need? It still need to tailor to process to whatever product that you're building. So again, if it's a physical product, that will require probably a different approach than a fully digital product. So how much agile you should have around you depends on the product. It's not, you shouldn't blindly go for agile as the first and best. The second one is when you do retrospectives, you just got to keep 3 things in mind. Basically, people, product, and process. The people, obviously, how they feel, how they think that things can be improved. The product needs to be improved. That's obvious because that's what you're there for. But also the process. So thing there is, and that ties into number 3, is everything you decide upon during the retrospectives, make it actionable. And then during the next retrospective, just look at whether or not you actually did the things you set out to do. So if you have any agreements that you made with different team members on, okay, this should be improved, or we should look at this, see there's actually action that has an action owner. So those are both 3 things you can break out of this, your process is stuck kind of way of working.
So Tommy, you mentioned, making things actionable, and I think the best way to do that is with metrics. In your experience, do you find people getting attached to certain metrics, such as velocity? That's one I hear a lot.
Actually, a good question. Yes. Once you set metrics in the beginning of a project or a beginning of your agile approach, you will see that people tend to stick to these metrics and do everything they can to improve those, while while in later stages of a project they might not meet the best possible metrics. So even the metrics that you use should be subject to review at the end of your iteration. Yeah, that's actually a great question, Kevin. Thanks. Moving on to number 3, also one that we also had in the Q&A. So I think that might answer some questions, is that management is just not on board. Basically, you're not on the agenda. Now, you can imagine that if you're running a large company, a complex company, you'll have shareholders, you'll have suppliers you have to deal with, business partners, and your agile implementation might not be the first item on the agenda. Now, of course, we all feel it should be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So what are a couple of things that you can do? One of the things, and this is a tricky one, is you can go straight to the sponsors. So usually in larger organizations, if you have an internal facing team, showing that you're working in an agile way where you have a lot of interaction with the business, you can go straight to the sponsors because you have so much interaction with them. So proving to them that agile works usually is a way to bypass management. Now this can be tricky because obviously bypassing management, these type of things might not be the best way forward. So it's situation dependent, but we do see it working in a lot of situations. So that's one thing you can do. The second one is to just get help. I don't know why, but if you have an external consultant telling you how things should be, for some reason that provides more value to the management, and they tend to listen to them better than internal coaches. Be that as it may, fine. So you can get outside help if that is what it takes to break the mold. And the last one, that might be a bit straightforward, but keep educating. So keep it up, keep the process, and keep improving the process. Try to connect with as many people around you and force that agile way of working. keep educating people on the benefits of it, and it will spread itself over time. So that's basically the 3 things you can do if management is not on board. If you do want to informally move away from the wagile state.
Yeah. So Tommy, I think the first point you made is so critical. You can't assume people will buy in automatically, right? You can't assume that adoption will just naturally occur. You have to earn it. You have to go sell it, and you have to do that. You can do that by what the number 2 and 3 items there are: getting help and educating others. You just continue to reach out. You continue to explain what it is, why you're doing it, what the benefits are, and you're going to get a lot of questions. You're going to get questions of what about this, and what if that, and what if this, and this one thing that happened to my company 14 years ago, what if it happens again? Oh my gosh. And that's going to happen. And you got to be prepared for that. You have to say, okay, well, it was 14 years ago. How have things been working in the 14 years since, right? But you also you don't want to dismiss those types of things. You do want to address them. So talk about the problem, the specific problem to that company and that person and that individual, and just walk through. Here's how it would go in Agile. Now, if you're not sure, you get help, right? Reach out to a coworker, reach out to Tommy and I, go find an article. Now, you don't want to bombard people with articles and links and webinars. You don't want to give them work, right? You don't want to give them a job. You want to do the work yourself and go to them and regurgitate it. You want to explain, here's what I did a little research on, and here's what I came up with. What else do you have for me? What's your next question, right? And slowly but surely, if you calmly answer those questions, you'll get the buy-in you need. But it's not going to happen automatically.
No, I couldn't agree more. Keep educating them. That's what I said. But I agree with you. Don't bombard them with too much info. You'll get on the wrong side. Then I agree. All right. So that brings us, I think, to the recap. All right, so we talked about Wagile is the worst. We talked about the 4 stages of an Agile mindset and how you can move through those and eventually move away from your Wagile state. Then we talked about the Wagile anti-patterns and the ones how you can identify that you find yourself in a Wagile state, and we tried to give tips on how to break free from those. That being said, it's time for Q&A.
Yeah.
Oh, we have a bunch of questions.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them in here. I'm going to start. This one's kind of jumping out at me. I've been taking a look at them, and this one kind of jumps out. So it's from Andre, and he says, so many teams I've worked with were stuck in Wagile or piecemeal and custom Agile implementations due to lack of experience and or desire to learn. Is there any way to address this? Brute force seems to be their common solution, and that unfortunately fails in the mid and long term. So Tommy, I'll take this one. Yeah, Andre, I've been there. Brute force is the common solution, and it does fail. So like I mentioned, you can't bombard people. You can't say, here's a book, go read the book, right? You can't give them a job. You have to do the work. And that is the best advice I can give you, is you do the work. This means making time in your schedule, right? If your schedule is booked with meetings, you're not going to be able to do the work. It's as simple as that. You have to make time in your schedule. You have to talk to your boss to know that this is one of your roles. You're going to be the Agile ambassador. And then you have to put in the time either over lunch, after work, before work, on your commute, maybe the train ride when we're commuting again, right? But you got to put in the work, and then you provide the answers. You don't provide the job. You provide the answers to those who you want to provide the brute force to, but you know that won't work. So put in the legwork, and things will go a lot smoother. Okay, let's go with another one here. Tommy, I'll throw this one over to you, and it's Agile within very large, this is from Joe. Agile within very large and complex organizations is tough due to the funding models driving the behavior of the PMO. Do you think Agile can work in large corporate environments? I do.
Yeah, I do. I do think if you manage to do your Agile transformation in a large Agile organization, which obviously is never finished, but you start with that, the benefits can be enormous, because well, we do know all of these large organizations that might have pushed for an Agile way of working. Might not be that they did it consciously, but companies like Spotify are unstoppable just because they have this Agile way of working. So I do think it's possible, but I think in large complex organizations, you run into more political type of things. So if you want to implement Agile in that type of organization, you really do need management sponsorship. You can do it on the team level, you can do it maybe on your program level. But if you really want to move the entire organization towards an Agile way of working, you'll definitely need management buy-in. And that means huge budgets, that needs a transition, and it also means people that don't have this Agile way of working in their blood, there might be negative consequences for them. So these are huge changes, but I do think it can work, yes, to answer your question.
Okay. This one's from Jennifer. Any tips of helping people to realize that their company is not special and must do wagile? Yeah, so every company, every organization, they all think they're special, right? And the truth is, as Tommy mentioned, people are special, organizations are not, right? Now, one organization is going to have some competitive difference between another organization. And in that respect, they're special, right? They have that competitive advantage or disadvantage. But the truth is, you know, a car manufacturer is a car manufacturer, whether that's here in another country, in another part of the same country. And you could build a car that, you know, any that might be a bad example, but point is, you can have two organizations that do the same thing. And while they each have competitive advantages, they are still the same company. All right. They're still doing the same thing, creating the same thing. So how do you make them realize that they're not special? A great example would be to find a white paper, a case study that uses Agile in that type of organization, right? So if you are in a healthcare organization, find an Agile case study for that healthcare organization. Now, they may not have the exact same problem that you're having, but they have the exact same guidelines and laws that they have to follow. And if they can get past it, you can get past it too. So it's having them realize that their special circumstance, whatever that is, maybe the special circumstance shouldn't exist, right? Maybe that's actually holding them back. And that's something you probably have to have a talk with your management. Tommy, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I agree that you with the fact that people make the organization special, and the way we organize ourselves. We've been doing that for thousands of years, basically, in the same way. So if you have an Agile way of organizing yourself, it still is the people and the way they adopt the process that make it special, not the organization itself. But yeah, it's hard to point out. I agree there. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Mind if I take the next one? Kevin?
Yeah, go for it.
Because this one has been looking at me the entire time. So it's from Ricardo, and I like this question. Hello, everyone. If the company has a small team of developers, is it wise to manage multiple projects using Agile and having the team jumping back and forth between projects, or using a waterfall approach and finish off the project? So this is your typical question. Do you bring the people towards the work, or do you let the team sit there and let the work come to them? And I love this question. And the best answer is, you should keep the team together, not split them up, keep them together and move the work towards them. That is definitely the best way to do that. Work from a backlog system, determine the priorities, and let the work flow through the team instead of having the team dispersed between the organization and work on different projects at the same time. That's not going to work. So yeah, thanks for that question. I really love that one.
Okay, so let's take this one from Dan. When leadership defines a project as a specific start date, specific end date, and adds value to the business, how do you convince the shift from waterfall to agile? Okay, so this is actually a tough one. So good question, Dan. If there is a specific start date, a specific end date, and the value add is minor, waterfall may be the way to go, right? If you're looking at 4 months of work, 3 months of work, maybe 5 or 6, waterfall may be the way to go. If the start date and end date is in place for an innovative project where you don't know where the end scope is, where the end goal is, at that point, you definitely want to start thinking about agile, even if it's a small amount of work. If you don't know what that end goal is, you really don't know how much work is there. And to have an end date on a project where you don't know what the end goal is, that's going to be counterproductive. You're always going to be pushing it out. So what you want to do is you want to have that conversation to say, is the end goal defined, right? Do I know that I have X amount of work or so forth? And even if you don't know the amount of work, if the end goal is defined, you could probably, as a project manager, you should be able to, or have a project manager go and ask the people, how long will it take to do this? What do we need to think about? And you plan that out all in your Microsoft project plan, and it follows that waterfall process, that Gantt chart. But like I said, if the end goal isn't known, or if it's a lot of work, right? If you have a large project with a specific start date of, let's say, tomorrow, and a specific end date of, let's say, 1 year from now. Now, 12 months is a long time. A lot of changes are going to happen in 12 months. And even though you know what the work is now and what the end goal is now, it won't be that way in 3 months or 6 months or even maybe 1 month. You should probably take an agile approach. Large projects, innovative projects, and digital projects where that architecture is going to be changing, you definitely want to consider an agile approach. So how do you convince them to do that? You know, have them watch the recording of this webinar. You know, as I mentioned before, you put in the work, you get the case study, you do the proving it out, and you get people on your side, you get help. And you go to the person or the group of people who are insisting on waterfall, and you go through that process of, I guess converting is the right word, right? You go through that process, converting them and helping them see a better way of doing things. All right, so thank you, Dan. All right, so here's another good one. Martin, how long do companies get stuck in wagile? Yeah, that's different for every company, right? Hopefully it's a short amount of time, right? It's going to happen. We've already established that it happens every single time. So hopefully they have that realization where it's a process. It's going to take some time, right? You can't say, hey, for our next year quarterly goals, we want to have a transition to agile. Yeah, that doesn't happen. That's wishful thinking. You want to be able to say, over the next 3 years, we want to transition to agile. And here's what we're doing this quarter to help with that. And we don't really know what we're doing next quarter or the quarter after that or the year after that. You want to be agile about it, right? You want to incrementally improve your process. To say we're going to be agile in 3 months, that's not going to happen. But how long does it take until leadership realizes that they're stuck in that agile state? They let go of that hybrid, and they get waterfall out of their ways of thinking, out of their ways of working, and out of their ways of talking. If they're still speaking in a waterfall language, they haven't moved on yet. It's as simple as that. You can't be talking about project plans. You can't be talking about, you know, a release every 3 months, right? That doesn't happen in an agile methodology and an agile mindset. And so if they're still talking that, you know, you're still there and you just have more work to do. I don't have an answer for you because it's different for every company and every person, really.
Okay, so let's take the next one off the top then. So we have Brian. We are a team of 6, 2 business analysts, 3 developers, 1 QA. We currently do quarterly releases containing many projects. How do you suggest implementing Agile? Do we use Agile methodology for a few of the projects, including in the next release? But yeah, this is actually a very good question. There are a couple of factors here that we don't know that kind of determine the way you should approach this. But from the information that I do have, I would suggest that you again create a backlog of all the work that you do and prioritize it, but try and break it up into chunks small enough that you can implement them. I don't know if this is regarding software, just software, or that you have a physical product, which might make it a bit more difficult to release in shorter iterations. But the thing that I'm reading through this is you should try and cut the work up in as smaller pieces as possible and try to deploy them as one of the first steps. And what agile methodology you should use on the team level, I would suggest either looking at Scrum if it's more software driven, or you might want to look at Kanban if you are more physical product approached. I hope that answers your question, Brian. I think we have time for another one. Let's see.
So here's a good one. This is from someone who's anonymous. How does Agile work in conjunction with audit and documentation? So, you know, if you're going to work with an audit team, you definitely want to involve them up front to find out at the end, hey, where's all your documentation? Here's what you need. Here's what you need to show me for whatever regulations or whatever internal or external company policies. That's going to be a problem, right? So you want to involve them up front. The documentation is, let's assume you're in a business and industry where documenting is law. Let's say healthcare, right? And you have to have certain documentation. You know, this person approved so and so, and while either you have a paper signature or an email signature or something like that. You have to store it in a secure location. I'm just making something up here. What you want to do is you want to create tasks. You want to create items that are going to go in your sprint backlog to do that work. Now, that work is going to seem trivial to some people, right? And it's going to be the first thing that people are, especially developers, they're going to say, you know, I don't want to do that. Let's drop that. We're already overloaded on this sprint. Let's just move the documentation out of the way. Well, if it's a legal requirement, you can't. So the priority needs to be at the top for those things, you know, or at the very, or near the top. So you make those items, you put them in your sprint backlog or in your product backlog, and then every sprint you bring a couple in and you make sure that all of them are done at the end. To just assume it's going to get done, it won't. And to think that it's going to get done when every sprint is probably going to be overloaded, that's what ends up happening. And you got to pick and choose things. You got to take some of the work out. Or you barter. You talk to the audit person. You say, hey, how much of this is really required? And you might find out that not all of it is required. 80% of it, maybe 90% of it's going to be required and you have to do it. But you may find that 10 or 5% that's not really required and is a nice to have. Those things can go at the bottom of the sprint list. So it's just good communication and involving people up front.
This kind of ties in with the question that Amit has. How do you integrate quality assurance in Agile? Basically in the same way. You include the QA persons during the development so that they iteratively work with the developers to make sure the quality is in the process itself. Another way you could do that, but also for the documentation side of things, it just make it part of the definition of done. So if you have a definition of done, when is our product actually ready, just include documentation there. So this feature is not done until it's well documented in whatever is needed in your industry. So the same thing goes for quality assurance. If you have quality assurance at being part of your team, definitely let them work with the developers as they are developing. That will put the quality in the process, and that would definitely make sure that the load is balanced out between these different people. All right.
I have a question here from Janie. How do you coach your team regarding a growth mindset and different way of thinking when they are contractors and non-employees? Okay, that's an excellent question. I was an employee for a very long time. I'm a contractor now. The fact is, you probably have to have a discussion with whoever the representative is for the contract agency. I'm assuming it's not independent, right? Let's assume you bring in one of these large agencies. You want to have a conversation with them to say, they're going to be part of our team. They're going to be here for a long time, probably. They're going to be part of our team. And we need to have a growth mindset. We need to be able to consistently improve things, and they should be staying on top of their game, right? They're contractors. They need to be the experts. So they need to be on top of their game. If they're not, you have that conversation with that representative. Now, let's say you're working with an independent contractor, such as myself. Basically, you got to let them know that, hey, you know, I hired you for your expertise. If you're not an expert, I can go find an expert, right? And so you want to have that conversation. You want to be delicate about it, of course, but you got to have that conversation to say, you got to keep learning. You have to keep getting better, and you have to keep improving. And if there's someone who is never there for lunch, they're not joining the team lunch and learns, you can tell they're not doing anything outside of work. You just have to sit down and have a difficult conversation with that person. And I know there's a couple of Pluralsight courses out there. I think Jason Alba has one on how to have difficult conversations. It was very good. But those are those types of conversations. You're going to have it at some point. You're going to have it with someone. So just prepare yourself, and also show reinforcement. Show that there are rewards for staying on top of your game, right? If there is a group of 5 people and one of them is a contractor and 4 of them are employees, you want to include that person, right? You don't want to exclude just because they're a contractor. Invite them to the team events. Make them part of the team. How they get paid really doesn't matter in the end, right? They're part of the team, and they should be included in the team activities and doing the team thing. And then in the conversations, right? Have a little contest. You know, show me what you learned today. Show me what you learned today. And hey, now the contractor's turn. Show me what you learned. So make it a fun experience, an inclusive experience.
All right. Let's see. Well, we have time for another one, I think.
Yeah.
So Janet, if your organization does not provide dedicated project resources to the Agile project, and resources are have to divide their time between operations and project work, do you ever get out of a wagile state? There's 2 things to that. In the ideal Agile world, you would have people indeed do both development and operations and not split them up. Now, obviously, if you take this approach that you're in an immature agile state where people have to divide their time between really having the operations side of things, then start doing some development, and that is not integrated well, it's difficult to split up those teams. Yeah, I would say how to move away from that. If management does not allow you to split those resources and dedicate them to a specific task, that's actually a tough one. If you're forced to do both development work and then switch over to the operations side, the only thing that I can say is you might want to make it aware to management that the switching cost between different tasks is large, and that's why you're losing a lot of benefits and a lot of value. If you can dedicate people on one team and let the work come to them, if that's possible, even the development or the operations, just mix them together in one backlog. I don't know the specifics of this situation. Then I would recommend that. Keep the teams together, have them sit together, and then bring the work to them. So at least you don't have this much, as much waste in the switching time. So that's something you can use as an argument for management. But yeah, to really move into an agile way of working, while it's not allowed by management, yeah, I can see that's difficult. I hope that answers your question as best as possible.
So Tommy, there's another question right on this that is very similar. It's from Wayne. What advice do you have for agile dev teams who are doing new project work while also responsible for real-time support of existing applications? So just as Tommy mentioned, splitting up is the best thing because of the constant context switching, right? You're going to be in a constant firefighting chaos mode. Some people love it. They're not really making any progress, but most people hate it because they can't make progress. And so what you could do there is you could take one person out of the team, and for 2 weeks, for one sprint, hey, Tommy, you're on my team. For these 2 weeks, you're going to be on support. And the next 2 weeks, I'm going to take support. And so you can kind of at least get the context switching down to a sprint by sprint basis, and there'll be a little bit of handoff there. Tommy, where did you leave off with these things? Hey, Kevin, where did you leave off with these things? But in the end, it's not bouncing back and forth the same day or the same sprint. So having a dedicated person, even if you can't have a dedicated person for it, you can at least rotate, and you can have a schedule for that. And that's another option for you. Okay, so Daniel, we're just going to keep going until you want us to wrap up here. Yeah.
That's really fine. It's up to you guys how long you want to go. I know there's a lot of other great questions in here, so go for it.
Yeah, there's a couple of good ones. How do I commit to a date and a set of features on a 6-month release without using waterfall? Well, I would say if you know the end goal and you know the timeline, now you're managing that iron triangle, right? Good, fast, and cheap. Pick any two. So that's and waterfall may be the best option there. If it's innovative work, if you don't know what the end goal is, you probably shouldn't commit to a 6-month time frame. If you do commit to a 6-month time frame, if that's committed to you, right? If you're voluntold, hey, you have 6 months to get this done, then you can't promise on how much you're going to get done because you don't know, the changes that are going to come up because you're doing innovative work. And so what it's the classic iron triangle: good, fast, and cheap. Pick any two. They can't have all three. So if they're going to pick time, cost, and quality, where do you have the most wiggle room? And so you want to have that conversation up front. You don't want to wait until the middle when expectations are set. You want to have that up front and set your expectations early. Now, if you're in the middle of a project right now, go have that conversation today or tomorrow, right? Have that conversation because you need to know where the wiggle room is.
All right. Margaret has a good one. What is the approximate time frame to Agile finally becoming Agile? Do you have any experience? Is it months or years? This depends on the complexity of the organization, pretty much. If you are a startup, usually you start out pretty Agile. But if you're a large, complex organization, this phase usually takes longer because you need to get more buy-in from multiple layers of management, usually, if you want to move away from this state. So it depends on the size of the company and obviously the amount of development teams and type of product that you have. I'd say in the larger companies, this can be years, to be honest. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not it. Yeah, it's at least 6 months. Once you realize with the examples that we gave that you're in a wagile state, you need to come up with a plan to overcome that. But it's a long-term process to move away from agile, especially in larger, complexer organizations. So I hope that's not this. I hope that's encouraging. But yeah, keep it up. That's the only way you can get out of that, I guess.
Yeah, and I realize that we're giving some of you bad news, but we're giving you the truth. It's better to be prepared, right? The older an organization is, the harder it's going to be, and the larger an organization is, the harder it's going to be. So if you're in a new organization, if you're in a small organization, you know, it's those tend to be easier and take less time, especially startups. You may be starting out in an agile phase, and waterfall may be a dirty word at that company, and that's fine. But as Tommy mentioned, the size and the age of the organization and the industry are definitely going to play a role.
So I got another nice one from Kevin here. To be successful, the other one. How long? So to be successful, how big should an agile team be? And that's quite straightforward. Eight persons max, and then you move to multiple teams. That was an easy one.
Yeah, yeah. And if you have a large organization, you know, where you're having 20 people in a team, there's a couple of teams, you want to look at scaled agile. And I think, Tommy, you have a couple of courses on that as well. Scaled agile is the way you scale it up, but you should not have 20 people in a daily stand-up, right? It's not going to be 15 minutes. You know, people's legs will get tired. So you do want to keep it small, and I agree, 8 is a really good size, a maximum size. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the I don't know why that is, but apparently maintaining good relations with 8 people is the max for us human beings. So let's see. There's so many great questions here.
I have a good one here. So this one's from Mitchell. Can Agile be used for projects that have set release cycles? And the example he gave is 3 releases per calendar year. So that's a good question, Mitchell. So if you are running a project that has a release every 4 months, you know what that timeline is. And I'm going to assume here that it's a government regulated release. Here's when you can do it, and you can't do it any other time, right? So let's assume that for a minute. So you know the time, and that's one of those 3 points in the iron triangle. That can't move. So what can move? You can adjust the scope, and you can adjust the budget, right? So if the scope can't move, I need more people, I need more resources, I need more tools, I need more training, right? You're going to ask, give me more, because how else am I going to do this? If the budget cannot move, but your timeline now and your budget can't move, okay, so now I just need to cut back on the scope. And if you're working in an agile methodology, that's easy to do because you're just taking on work every sprint. If the scope is given to you, you know, you're really probably looking at a waterfall methodology for a 4-month project, you know, depending on your certain situation.
Well, it's trying to find the mute button. So we got one from William here. How do you deal with programmer frustration of having to redo all the work because we missed out use cases without having to waterfall every single possibility? Well, that's a good one. So my first advice would be, if you have a lot of different types of features that you have to build with your team, you might want to look at the process of how you get that into the backlog and how you create your definition of ready. So when you think that the items in your backlog are ready to be executed by the team, and then look at the definition of done later on for quality. But basically, if you notice that you're missing use cases and therefore the product doesn't seem to be fit for purpose, you should create a quality criteria upfront of what the feature should look like and have some sort of verification mechanism there with the business. But there, the only thing you can do is increase that interaction with the business and make sure you are comprehensive in capturing all of these use cases. So you know what work is coming. You know exactly what you can do to make sure you capture it comprehensively.
Having those conversations early, you know, where you start thinking ahead. Hey, when I program this, you know, you've been a programmer for a while, you know, you're going to start anticipating things. You want to have those conversations early. Well, what about this situation? And you want me to put a button over here, but what happens if I click over here? What should happen there, right? Those are the types of things you want to ask early so that it's a complete story and a complete feature. If you're missing use cases, that means the feature really wasn't thought out as far as it should be. All right, so here's one from Anonymous. Senior management wants to plan work based on dates. How do we get agile? How do we get an agile approach on this? Yeah, so senior management is still thinking in a waterfall mindset, right? They want everything based on dates. And as we mentioned before, if it is known work, you know the end goal, you should be able to do it, right? Now, your quality may have to get adjusted, your budget may have to get adjusted, but if you have a date and an end goal, it shouldn't be that hard. You can use waterfall. If you don't know the end goal, that's when you want to take an agile approach. Now, you can say on this day, we're going to have a release, but I can't promise you what we're going to have, right? If the scope and the date are given to you, you got to use a waterfall approach, and it's simply ask for more money. Now, money is the number out of those three things. Money's usually the one that can't move, right? Now, in some companies, it can, but especially in a time like right now, companies are saving money. And so that's going to be a hard no for a lot of people. And what you want to do is you want to have a talk. The business owns this project, all right? IT does not own the project. The business owns the project. And so the business needs to state, here's where I have flexibility and here's where I don't. If they're demanding all three, it's simply, it's a dream world. You can't do that. It's a fantasy. You have to have some flexibility in that.
All right. All right, so from Fred, many tech companies where agile comes in the form of waterfall projects with an agile development phase. Any recommendations for converting the other project phases, initiation, planning, closure, etc.? This has a lot. So this is actually a good question. When you have a project in the let's say older way of doing things, indeed you would have a startup phase where you get the budget. You have a planning phase, then you would have another planning phase if feasible, then the development, and then maybe testing and implementation. Doing less work up front for the first phases, so doing a minimal design up front, is something that has to do with the trust that management actually has in your project and your way of working. So again, this comes down to the interaction you have with management. If you can sell the idea of agile and some of the let's say uncertainties that are inherently to that way of working, you can at least shrink those phases that you mentioned, like initiation and all the preparation phases. The closing out phase of the project, yeah, ideally you would have that in a lot of that done in the definition of done of your backlog. If that is then everything is completed per the quality standards, then the wrap up of the project usually is a pretty insignificant effort, let's say. That is not to say, if it depends on how formal your organization is, that there is handover processes probably. But yeah, so basically having these other phases that are not the development phase shrink, that has to do with the let's say the management buying into your smaller design up front as usual, let's say. Okay, I think we ended up at the last question. Kevin, you want to take it?
Yeah. So this one's from Anonymous. It says, we create a digital product in an R&D organization, in a larger organization. So a lot of innovative work. The rest of the organization sells the product before it is ready and gives us hard deadlines. How do we handle that? Okay, so this is a great question. And the first thing I want to mention is, I know you're probably frustrated. They're selling the work, they're making promises, and you're having a hard time delivering because it's a lot of work and not enough time, right? But you got to look at the bigger picture here. They sold the product. That's what the business is, right? They sold the product. They're writing your paycheck. So you got to keep that in mind. That should calm down the frustration a lot, right? That's what they have to do. That's how you grow. That's how you sustain. So knowing that, they made promises on deadlines. Here's a product. The best thing to do in this case, you got to ask for more people. If it's too much work and not enough time, you need better tools and you need more people. That's how you have to do that. So if they're gonna say, hey, here's the timeline and here's the scope of work that needs to be developed, the only option there is to get more budget, right? And so a lot of things go back to that iron triangle. And so you got to ask for more money. If you can't do that, you have to go to the business owner and say, and it's a calm question, right? You're not being defiant. You're just simply saying, hey, I only have so much money. I have so much time. What can I cut? Right? The answer isn't always, hey, have the team work 60 hours and everybody do overtime. You'll burn out very quickly, and they'll be in no better of a place when they have to replace all of you. So you want to work together. You want to have a calm conversation, and you want to ask, if the budget is not flexible, what is flexible? Is it the timeline or is it the scope, right? But don't forget, selling is a good thing. It's a good problem to have. That's important to remember.
That's true. Yeah. Great question, by the way. Thank you. All right. I think that's it, Daniel.
Great. Thank you so much to both Tommy and Kevin for taking the time. I know there's a lot of questions that came through. You tackled a ton of them. There's a few that we didn't quite get to. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that submitted their questions. And even if you didn't get your question read, we just really appreciate the great kind of dialogue and engagement that we've seen. Just one reminder to those who have asked, we did record today's webinar. So if you're joining us right now on Zoom, we will email you a link to the recording either today or tomorrow. We usually try to get those out pretty quickly. If you joined us on another channel, then you can rewatch it immediately because those have recorded on the respective channels. And one other reminder, I try to drop in a link to this, but if you're interested in getting an email reminder for upcoming Pluralsight webinars, you can go to the URL go.pluralsight.com/webinars. And that's just a simple way to get reminded of upcoming webinars. Hopefully some in the future will also feature Tommy and Kevin here. And with that, I just wanted to give both of you guys the chance to maybe leave one final takeaway with the audience that's still with us.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I'll start then. I think what you should take away, if anything, from this webinar is that being in a agile state is natural. It happens to almost every organization, and you should not be discouraged by it. But if you keep it up and keep improving your process over time, it will work towards other teams, and they will definitely start turning around and also becoming and embrace that agile way of working. So I guess that's my takeaway for this one.
Yeah, and mine would be, you can't do this by yourself. If you entered an organization, a very traditional organization that has waterfall ingrained there, and you're a consultant, let's say, you're not going to be able to make this change by yourself. It's going to be a long time, and you have to get people on your side. It's going to take time if it's the best way to go. So get help, right? Open up to others, have conversations, watch webinars, read articles, take courses. But have the conversations, because getting to Agile is not sending everybody to a class, right? It's just not. It's having the conversations and getting them to change their mindset. That's the most important thing, not the tools, the mindset.
That's great. Thanks again to both of you, and thanks to everyone who joined us, and everyone have a great rest of their day.
Thanks, Daniel. Bye, everyone.